Shabbat Shalom. Open any news source, and America's culture wars dominate the headlines. With conservatives on one side and liberals on the other, we vilify each other as if in preparation for a civil war. It is therefore imperative that as we mark Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, which begins tonight, that we remember the words of the Talmud that inform us that God allowed the destruction specifically of the second Holy Temple because of Sinat Chinam, the gratuitous, senseless hatred that existed among Jews at the time, which opened the door for the Roman conquest of the Holy Land. Culture wars lead to civil wars. Civil wars lead to incredible vulnerability to the outside. However, I believe that not only does Judaism offer us guidance in addressing the culture wars of our day, but Judaism also demands that we engage each other, especially when we disagree with each other. In the name, then, of seeking to bridge divides by facilitating communication, allow me, please, this Shabbat, Davka, this Shabbat, in anticipation of Tisha B'Av, to share my thoughts with you, humbly. And I invite you, please, with respect and kindness, to share your thinking with me. Let's learn together and let's discuss together. If we're to accept the verbal grenades tossed by politicians and pundits, it is perhaps the battle over race and racism that most threatens to unweave the very fabric of this country. So let's talk about race and racism. The good news is on this topic that the majority of Americans, the reasonable left and the reasonable right, agree. Racism is wrong, and yet racism still exists. While there are a few on the radical left consumed with relitigating the slavery of the 17th and 18th centuries, it seems to me, too, that most Americans agree as well that great strides have been made in combating racism. We agree that early Americans' possession and use of slaves was immoral. The reasonable left and the reasonable right agree that even after the country outlawed slavery, racial progress proceeded far too slowly. However, we should all agree as well that through blood, sweat, and tears, our country has, especially since 1964, made incredible strides as it pertains to combating racism. Moreover, if we want to continue combating racism, common sense dictates that we should celebrate and reward our accomplishments. Though racism still exists, the good news is that studies show that America is indeed becoming less and less racist. Though the work is not yet done, as it pertains to racist attitudes and overt discrimination, things are getting better. That said, when the police officer murdered George Floyd a little more than a year ago, it released a torrent of long-time pain and an avalanche of built-up fear. In this country, many people of color fear for their lives and well-being, and even more, they fear for their children's lives and their children's well-being. People of color are afraid because our country continues to experience racial disparities in wealth, education, employment, housing, policing, incarceration, political disenfranchisement, and health, especially as we saw during this last year of COVID-19. Additionally, the violence within communities of color is rampant, the drug use severe, and the despair immeasurable. Why? Certainly no single cause exists for the inequality from which people of color suffer, and everyone loves to play the blame game. Some point to certain minority communities' lack of commitment to education, or the plight of the single-parent household, or misplaced priorities as it comes to spending discretionary income. Others point to the existence of systemic racism, when conscious or unconscious racist attitudes intersect with institutional practices. It results in vastly different treatments, systems of care, and outcomes for different racial groups. Systemic racism also describes the connections between racist policies of the past and present-day inequities. A striking example is the impact of racial discrepancies in the post-World War II GI Bill, which, among other benefits, provided low-cost mortgages to returning white veterans including Jewish veterans, and paid their tuition if they wanted to attend college or university. While approximately 125,000 black servicemen fought in World War II, the benefits afforded under the GI Bill were not similarly extended to them. This meant that white servicemen were able to purchase low-cost homes that would build generational equity, and they could access a free college education that would increase their job prospects and net worth. Black servicemen received no such benefit. The wealth of white servicemen who were able to build home equity and access high-paying jobs has accumulated over generations, resulting in a racial wealth gap today, where the average white family has approximately 10 times the net worth of a black family. The racial wealth gap shows the effects of centuries of racism intersecting with societal systems. As compassionate human beings, as patriotic Americans, and as Jews who are obligated to care for our own people, which includes people of color, we must try to remedy the causes of these fears. I'm moved by the teaching from the Talmud that instructs us that whenever there is a crisis, we should examine first our own deeds. God implants within each human the Yetzer Hara, the animal instinct. And a side effect of this animal instinct is the development of prejudice against those who do not look like us, talk like us, or act like us. This is why the Mishnah says, Ezehu Gibur, who is a hero? One who overcomes his Yetzer Hara. Just as our ancestors repented for their own misdeeds when the first and second holy temples were destroyed by the Babylonians and the Romans respectively, we are all therefore obligated to look inward and outward to see the extent to which the individual and the collective Yetzer Hara causes racism among private interactions, among legal proceedings, during social interactions, business exchanges, and within the operations of our society's institutions. We must explore our own hearts to overcome our Yetzer Hara, to allow our Yetzer HaTov, our good instincts, to ascend. We at Shaarey Zedek are engaging in diversity, equity, and inclusion training with these exact goals: to learn, to reflect as a function of cheshbon hanefesh, and where necessary, to do teshuvah, repentance, for our own shortcomings, and then to improve. Moreover, the reasonable left and the reasonable right agree conceptually that diversity and inclusion strengthen a community, a college or university, a business or a governmental body. We agree that diversity and inclusion are worthwhile goals as it pertains to broadening the scope of participation and opportunity for any gender, sexual identity, and race. In fact, I think that as it pertains to race and racism in America, there is so much on which most of us agree. That said, there appears to be a gvul, a border, that some Jews choose not to cross in terms of ending racial inequality. In my learning, I discovered that while Jews have long supported affirmative action in theory, the Jewish community opposed affirmative action when it came to quotas. In other words, we've long supported increasing minority representation in various aspects of society, but we draw the line when the conversation becomes zero-sum, when including a person of color might mean excluding a Jew. One might be okay, for example, with more people of color attending the University of Michigan. However, one might not be okay if allowing more people of color to attend the university means that his or her own children cannot get in. As a parent of a high school student, I empathize with this fear. Perhaps we view the battle against racism like we might view tzedakah. We're obligated to give not less than 10%, but we're forbidden from giving more than 20%. This might suggest that we're willing to pay a little more in taxes or a little more in college tuition to support people of color, but we're not willing to sacrifice large sums of money or our children's educational pursuits to end racism. A similar conversation might occur regarding slave reparations, and is in this topic in particular that is for me the most vexing, and to which I'm turning to you for even further learning and discussion. On one hand, We know that the biblical Egyptians gave the Israelites gold and other objects when our ancestors left slavery on their way out of Egypt. And that in our own day, the German government gave reparations to Holocaust survivors. On the other hand, today's African American community is generations removed from slavery, and certainly my family was not even around in America during slavery. Additionally, my immigrant ancestors worked night and day to provide for their families with gratitude for America on their lips, and they directed their children to focus on hard work and education as the keys to success. Then again, my family certainly benefited from the American economic system, which was built on the backs of people of color. To which Jewish values and to which Jewish laws do we turn as we argue with the question of what more we can do beyond individual teshuvah to address the racial inequality in this country? I know that I'm obligated to pursue justice, equality, but I also know that I'm obligated to offer compassion, equity. I know that my fellow Americans and that my fellow Jews are suffering, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid to give up too much. I wonder then how we might get out of the zero-sum game to see combating racism, ending racism, as a win-win for all. As we prepare to mark Tisha B'Av this evening, we remember the words of the Talmud that inform us that God allowed the destruction of the Second Holy Temple because of sinat chinam, the gratuitous, senseless hatred that existed among Jews at that time, and because of culture wars, opened the door to the conquest of the Holy Land. Among Judaism's gifts to the world then is the teaching that the antidote to political polarization is the ability, modeled by Jews, to participate in meaningful and even heated dialogue, rooted in respect, in radical listening, and in giving our opponent the benefit of the doubt. In the name then of seeking to bridge divides by facilitating communication, thank you for allowing me this Shabbat, Davka, this Shabbat in anticipation of Tisha B'Av, to share these few thoughts with you and to invite you, please, with respect and kindness, to share your thinking with me. I have much yet to learn. We all have much yet to learn. But we know that our fellow Americans, we know that our fellow Jews are in pain, and so we must address this pain. I invite you too, in the name of learning, to join me this coming Tuesday evening at 7:00 p.m. on Zoom as we further this conversation. May your fast tomorrow of Tisha B'Av be meaningful, and may your time, our time of contemplation, be successful. Shabbat Shalom.